Hello and welcome to the Views Expressed. We are a public affairs program broadcasting on WACA-TV right here in Ashland, Massachusetts. Today we have a very special guest, Muriel Kramer. She is a candidate for Governor's Council here in the Commonwealth, District 2. Ms. Kramer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me and for doing this for all the candidates. I really appreciate this.
Well, we appreciate having you too. And we're not going to waste any of your time. We're just going to jump right into it if that's okay.
Great.
Awesome. So a little bit about you first. What's your personal background?
Oh, wow. So my personal background, I'm a United States Air Force veteran. My husband and I moved to Massachusetts. Actually, I grew up in Massachusetts, but we moved back to Massachusetts after college because we were stationed at Hanscom Air Force Base. And we've been in Hopkinton actually for probably about 32 years. And I left the Air Force, I did some freelance writing for local papers. Worked as a certified pharmacy technician for a number of years. My husband and I raised our 6 children here, and then I went back to school when my youngest were in high school, and I got my degree in social work, looking for a degree that I could use to work in social justice fields. I didn't, at the time when I was looking for my next chapter's work, I didn't know that social work was social justice work, found that out, and went back to Boston College. Actually, they have a macro social work program, which is about systemic change, transformational social work. So that's what I did. And I started my social work career in homelessness services in Boston and Cambridge. So working with a lot of people with very deep challenges, a lot of access challenges to services and supports for healthcare in general, but certainly behavioral health care, substance use disorder treatment, mental health treatment. And that's actually what brings me to fast forward to the work I want to do on the Governor's Council.
Well, there are a lot of questions, and we're going to save those for a little later. But that's a very interesting background. But you're running for Governor's Council right now. First, I'm going to ask you why you're doing this, but I also want you to explain for some of our viewers out here who may not be familiar with what the Governor's Council is charged with doing. If you could give a little background on what this position is, what is the Governor's Council, and then why you're running.
Yep. Yeah, I really appreciate that. So the Governor's Council is a little bit of an advisory council, just to use sort of layman's language, for the governor and lieutenant governor on appointments for judges, clerk magistrates, parole board appointees, industrial accident review board appointees, some bills that come before the Governor's Council. Also pardons and commutation decisions, also decisions on notary publics and justice of the peace. So there's actually a very broad scope of appointments that the Governor's Council might be tasked to interact with.
When you say interact, does the Governor's Council make those appointments, or what's their function in those?
Yeah, they make the final decision on those appointments. Yes. So they have an opportunity to review the candidate's professional record, personal experiences too, I'm sure, if they play into the professional record. Although I think in 2024, we need to draw a bright line between a person's personal life and their professional life. But those are lines that are sometimes hard in real time. But they do make these decisions. They get a chance to review the work. They get a chance to interview the candidates before the Governor's Council hearing, and then they get a chance again to publicly interview as a collective. So they can interview these candidates individually, and then they meet on Wednesdays typically. The public can, by the way, watch these meetings or watch them after the fact because they live stream them. And they meet, they interview the candidates, and then typically a week later, they vote on the candidates, whether to make the appointments or not to make the appointments.
So that thank you for providing that detail. I feel that sometimes voters will see that circle on their ballot and just sort of like fill it in and not really understand like
I think
what
you're
that
right.
position is.
I
Yeah.
think you're right. And you mentioned the ballot, and it's not just that the governor's council work is a little bit obscure. And you mentioned this before we started. It's unique to Massachusetts, and I think maybe one other state. I'm not sure how many states have it, but certainly not
Yeah.
many. It's a holdover from colonial times, from the
It
beginning of
is.
time.
Yep.
So a lot of people may not understand how the governor's council works or why there is a governor's council. And then also on the ballot, you're right. And it's even a little bit more obscure because on the ballot, we are listed as counselors. It doesn't even say governor's counselor. It says counselor. So when you get your ballot, if you're invested in voting, you have to flip that ballot on over the primary ballot. And then under counselors, you have to choose one of the four Democratic candidates. And there is legislation.
Well, I think there's a Republican candidate that's running as well. So,
There will
um,
be. So in
yeah,
November, there will be a
on the ballot. Well,
Republican.
it depends on what
Yes,
ballot you pull. So, if you're pulling
correct.
a Republican ballot, I'm not sure where that's placed on the ballot, whether it's on the other side or not. But
Oh, I
look for
think it's
that.
probably, you're right. I think it's probably the same, to be honest with you, but I'm
Okay,
not
yeah,
100% sure. Yeah.
yeah. But no, it's still great information, and thanks for clarifying that. Because, like, counselor, like, what does that mean? Like,
What is
people
that?
think it is. So now we understand what governor's council is. Why are you running for governor's council?
Yeah. Yeah, I am running for a very specific reason. I work professionally, um, working to elevate the voices of people who are impacted by systems into the process of developing those systems. So very often when we think of doesn't we don't have to think very hard to understand how powerful judges and clerk magistrates and parole board appointees are. I think most of us, if we're paying attention to the news, can see the impact of judicial appointments. What I think is a little harder to understand, perhaps for some people, is how those appointments in a real way impact the people that appear before those judges. So I work in substance use disorder system development mostly. I am a very big proponent of expanding options other than incarceration for people who are substance using or suffering from mental illness. I think that we can do a much better job diverting people, employing restorative justice mechanisms, really helping people that appear before us. Accountability is a very important thing. So I don't want to lose sight of that. But also, upwards of 70% of the people who are in jails and prisons or enmeshed in the legal system are people suffering from mental illness or substance use disorder or both. A very high percentage and people of color are overrepresented in that system. I want to elevate that conversation. That conversation is happening, but what we don't talk to about a lot is how to make a change so that we level the playing field and address equity.
So you are running for governor's council because these are some of the issues that you're concerned about, and as a counselor, we'll get into like some of the specifics around that, but I just want to be clear that I understand like what you're running,
Yeah, I want to make sure
why this is
judges,
important. Yeah.
yeah, I want to make sure judges and clerk magistrates are really fully informed about the things that they can do to
Mhm.
connect people to healthier futures.
Okay, that's great. I want to take it back to some of the conversation we just had about governor's council and how it's a holdover from colonial times. And I think there's one other, it may actually be a commonwealth, it may not even be a state, but like that has a governor's council. There has been a lot of talk over the past few years and questions about like should this body even exist. Many states don't even have it. They seem to function just fine. I know you're running for this office, so you clearly feel like there's a function for it. But I'd love to get your viewpoint on that particular viewpoint. Like,
Yeah.
is it really needed right now?
Is it
Why?
really, is it really needed? Why do we
Yeah,
use this system? Yeah,
yeah.
I think that that is the right conversation to have in 2024, right? I absolutely do. And I am not emotionally attached to holding on to the governor's council. I do recognize that the governor's council has power in the system the way it's designed. And so if we have one, I want it to be populated with people who represent differently, not just attorneys, um, not just people who are sort of dedicated to the legal system as it exists today. I really want to see people who are going to spark conversation and change within the criminal legal system. It also impacts family law, youth law, all kinds of law, workers' compensation, workers' safety law. So it's not just criminal law, but equity is a concern and a major focus across all facets of the law. So I think that your question is it do we even have it? I think that it's a good conversation to have. Maybe we don't need it, but if we don't have it, we do need a system whereby there is some check and balance on the appointment process. But I would be very open to a more modern approach.
Well, Ms. Kramer, I'm not asking you to redesign the system of this small like broadcast here, but
Yeah.
thank you for sharing. I'm looking for an answer, but the good questions to raise and very helpful to think about for all of us to think about. Uh, you've talked extensively about your background in mental health and substance disorder, substance use disuse or use disorder. Advocacy and support. It sounds like those are two policy issues that you're very concerned about um, as it pertains to you being on governor's council. You also talked about not being, you're not an attorney,
Right.
but this is the experience that you bring. Um, why are these two top policy issues so important to you? And specifically, what do you hope to accomplish as a governor's on the governor's council, as a counselor, to address some of these issues?
Yeah, great question. So they matter because people with substance use disorder, mental health issues, and people who experience poverty, they're overrepresented in the system. And judges and clerk magistrates in particular have a real role in reversing that trend, right? And
Can I
leveling that
interrupt you for a
playing field.
second?
You can.
Clerk magistrates, what do they do exactly? Because I feel like a lot of people aren't familiar with a lot of these terms.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm the person to give you the whole short course on clerk magistrates, but they are in
Okay.
charge of courts, and they do things like issue warrants, right? And those are very impactful for people. There's a lot more to know about clerk magistrates, but they're very powerful players in the system that at times we know disadvantages certain categories or subpopulations of people. So we need to start asking those questions of those folks.
In your background as a substance abuse counselor and someone who has done work with folks who are suffering from mental illness, as a counselor on governor's council, how would you? Those are policy issues that you care very much about. How do you see that translating over to your work on governor's council specifically? Like, what
Yeah, so
actions would you take or not take around those issues if elected?
yeah, I just want to clarify, I'm not a substance use disorder counselor, but
Oh,
I
I'm
work in
sorry.
that field. No, it's fine. I work in the field of actually really building systems and
Oh,
identifying system needs and helping systems change. So one of the things that I bring forward from my professional experience is change management tools and techniques and so forth. So for example, it's very hard to change anything effectively. If you want to change it, you have to actually identify it and you have to measure it. So I think that transparency is a real concern and something to highlight. In 2024, the Governor's Council doesn't have online you can't have online access to their votes. Well, that's a simple thing to address. I think that percentages of people that that represent with diversity, whether it's geographic diversity, so the entire state is represented, whether it is defense versus prosecuting experience, where if there's balance there, and certainly racial and cultural diversity, as well as diversity of experience, is very important. So making sure that the judges we appoint for the future, or any of the appointees that we appoint for the future, really represent the community that we live in, with a better understanding, probably, of the experiences of a broader variety of the public, is very important. Also, just simply telling, simply helping educate, small ways, educate judges, for example, in how to connect people to substance use disorder treatment, just the mechanics of how to use the system in different ways. A lot of the work that we do in developing substance use disorder treatments in cities, counties, states, includes law enforcement, includes the judicial system, and making those connections to help systems and people in the systems connect over the gaps between the systems is really important. So very often, I've been watching the Governor's Council meetings and attended a few. Very often, people understand that there is race, the impacts of systemic racism. We do have a lot of people who could use treatment, but they don't get to the questions about how can we move forward and make a change. And honestly, judges and clerk magistrates and parole board appointees have a huge role in that. They can have a very constructive role in helping individuals that are in the system connect over that divide. And that's what I hope to bring is really education, purpose, how we might make change, and also reporting where we are today, and talking a little bit about where we want to be, right? What's the system of the future we really want to see, and how do we incrementally build to get there together?
Oh, thank you for clarifying those points, Ms. Kramer. It was very helpful. And so it sounds like, I'm just curious, it sounds like currently there are resources lacking for judges and other folks in the court system to be able to connect people with those resources.
I bet that the resources are there. I bet that it is more that people don't understand what resources might help them do their job even better in terms of constructive paths forward for people. Let me take an example for substance use disorder. Relapse. Most of us who are professionals in the healthcare world know that relapse, a recurrence of the disorder, is part of recovery. And in the judicial system, often relapse is sort of a hard stop, a hard fail. And an individual can easily get bounced out of recovery services and back into carceral services, when there is a better way to address that. That relapse can be accounted for within the judicial process as well, right? And in the treatment process, what it means is that you should be reassessed for the level of care that you need. So imagine if judges, clerk magistrates, parole board appointees knew that relapse wasn't a hard stop, wasn't a failure, but it was part of the process. And there's a mechanism in place in the healthcare system to help people, and they can employ that mechanism and get people back into reassessment for level of care, appropriate level of care treatment, right? That's just a more constructive process if it's possible.
Excellent. So I will also ask, is this your first foray into public service?
No, it's my first foray into public service at that level. I have been an elected or appointed official in Hopkinton for 20 years. So I've served on the select board 2 different terms. I've been the chair for 3 of the 6 years. I've served on the planning board I've also been the deputy town moderator, been chair of the master plan committee, served on the Board of Appeals, a variety of roles. I have been active for 20 years.
This kind of dovetails into my next question.
Sure.
So with that experience and some of the other experience, but we've heard about, what in your opinion makes you uniquely qualified to serve on the Governor's Council?
I think that I bring a different perspective, in particular, that my focus is on making sure that everybody focuses on the needs of the individuals that are most impacted by our legal system when we are making decisions about who will represent us in the future as judges, clerk magistrates, parole board appointees, and so forth. Right? It matters. We don't have to look very far to see the way those appointments can matter. So we need judges for the future, just to use judges as an example, who will not just maintain the status quo, but are really willing to lean into what we today know in terms of bias and systemic racism and substance use disorder treatment as examples. Lean into what we now know and help move the system forward to better serve people rather than just simply incarcerate people.
Okay, well, we're coming up on the end of our time together. So I want to thank you again for joining us. But before we wrap this up, I do want to give you the opportunity to kind of make your closing arguments.
Closing arguments.
Your closing arguments, as it were, as to why folks should consider you for Governor's Council. I don't want to make it adversarial against other candidates. Like I said,
no.
This series is really about having candidates tell a little bit about themselves so voters can make informed decisions. But we're not. It is purposely why I didn't do a roundtable or a debate amongst the candidates, because I wanted folks to be able to talk. So I want to give you this opportunity to talk a little bit about to make your case.
I really appreciate that. I sincerely hope that people will consider me, and obviously I hope they'll vote for me. But what I really want that people to realize is that I hope to represent a little bit differently. There's some really wonderful people who have served as Governor's Council. There are some really wonderful candidates who are running in District 2 for Governor's Council. But I represent a little bit of a difference, I believe, in that I really want to elevate the voices of those that have been underserved or disadvantaged in the system, right? I want to make sure that when we are elevating people to positions of power at every intersection of the legal system, whether it's criminal law, whether it's family law, whether it's workforce safety, at every intersection, there are people who are disadvantaged at every level, and we can talk about it, we can measure it, we can design improvements, and we can insist on progress. So yes, we want to protect our rights as they exist today, right? Women want the right to choose for themselves their own healthcare decisions. Yes. We want to protect LGBTQ rights. We want to protect everyone's rights, but we also want to make sure we are really constructively interacting with the fact that the system over the last 30 years has, in Massachusetts alone, our incarceration rate has risen 300% in the last 30 years. We can make a difference in that. We can shift that trend and invest our dollars in communities and in education and in infrastructure and in treatment rather than incarceration. So I want to expand on what options exist to really constructively work with the person that's in front of you. If you're a judge, what can we do constructively to hold a person accountable and make sure they are supported and best connected to a positive future. Some 90, 95, 98%, I don't know the statistic, of people who are incarcerated come back to communities. We want them to come back healthy, right? With with healthier futures. We want to make sure we're doing the best we can as a society to provide treatments if they're needed while people are incarcerated and make sure they're transitioned out again with services and treatments so that they can move forward in a healthy way.
Well, with that, I want to thank you, Ms. Kramer, for coming on the show. Once again, Muriel Kramer, running for Governor's Council District 2. And when is the primary?
The primary is September 3rd. There are 4 Democratic candidates, and then the general election is November 5th. For whatever Democratic candidate makes it through the primary, they will have a Republican opponent in November.
And Ms. Kramer, one more thing. Is there a way that folks can reach you or find out more about your campaign?
Yeah, I have a website, murielkramer.com. I hope you will check it out and send me an email. You can send me an email straight through the website. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I want to know what people out there that I'm hoping to represent, what they prioritize for the future of the Governor's Council and the work we do there.
Ms. Kramer, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, viewers, for watching the views expressed in our Governor's Council's Canddate series.
Thank you so much.
We'll see. Thank you. See you next time.